host Sana, and today's episode takes us into a space where innovation meets introspection. Now, in a world where mental health care it often feels cold, clinical, or even impersonal, what if listeners healing could be reimagined as something tender, technological, and deeply human? And listeners, meet my guest for today, Dr. Robert Common. So, Robert Fee is the founder and CEO of the Beekeeper, which is an award winning mental health group blending cutting edge tech with ancient healing practices across facilities in Thailand, Sri Lanka, and soon London. And listeners, Robert's journey from international development with the UN to the front line of transformative mental health care is anything but conventional. His work is grounded in ethical leadership and shaped by personal experience, which is a rare combination of heart, humility, and hard earned wisdom. So today we are asking, how can mindfulness not only heal individuals but guide leaders and entire systems toward more conscious care? So let's quickly begin. So, Robert, welcome to the show, and I'm really honored to have you here with us.
It's a real privilege to be with you here today. Thank you, Sana.
That's beautiful. Robert, I have to ask about your model at the beekeeper. It blends uh, so many interesting things: mindfulness, AI, then the Eastern traditions. It's like the tech, the ancient wisdom, the channels, the practices. All of them are so beautifully blending. So in a space which is often driven by clinical data and hard science, how do you ensure that these approaches are um, taken seriously in Western mental health care systems?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think increasingly mindfulness has a greater role to play in contemporary clinical psychology and psychiatry due to the work of people like Bessel van der Kolk, who've really introduced this work into the mainstream through their academic research. And it's been quite a journey over the last 10 years, especially.
Mm.
Some of the seminal work. So, for instance, The Body Keeps Score, being the book that Bessel van der Kolk wrote, was a seminal piece that helped guide the introduction of mindfulness into the treatment of PTSD. He was the one who first posited and evidenced the use of yoga as an efficacious treatment for post traumatic stress disorder and complex trauma. At the Beekeeper, mindfulness isn't a side thing, it's really the foundation of what we do. We don't just teach it as a standalone exercise, it's embedded in the way that we hold space, the way that we listen, and the way that we help people rebuild trust in their own internal experience. We work with people dealing with trauma, addiction, burnout, and complex mental health challenges. And one of the most powerful interventions we offer is the ability to help someone simply be with themselves. Now, that may sound simple, but for people who spent years dissociating or numbing or fighting their internal world, learning to sit in stillness is actually quite a radical concept for them.
Mhm.
Mindfulness, when it's paired with evidence based therapies such as acceptance and commitment therapy, EMDR, and somatic work, creates a healing process that isn't just about symptom reduction, it's about reconnection. And we help clients come home to their bodies, to notice how emotions move through them, and to reframe suffering not as personal failure, but as part of shared human condition. And that's
Mhm.
the behind Buddhist psychology, and it's what allows people to move beyond coping and into recovery that's sustainable and self-led, if you like.
Hmm. That is so interesting. That is so interesting. And Robert, do you ever face skepticism from the traditional practitioners or insurers? I mean, and if yes, then how do you navigate that tension without compromising your values?
Yeah, we do all the time, and it's a great question. And one of the misconceptions I often encounter is that you have to choose between science, spirituality, and mental health care. I've
Mm,
always believed, and our work at the Beekeeper reflects this, that some of the deepest healing happens when you stop trying to pick sides. But it's is in many ways the oldest form of behavioral science. It teaches awareness, interdependence, the impermanence of emotion, and the practice of compassion, not as abstract ideals, but as daily disciplines. And when we combine with evidence based modalities like EMDR, somatic therapies, third wave CBT, we can
mm,
create an environment where clients aren't just treated, they're met. Importantly, we're not promoting a belief system, we're integrating a framework that helps people understand the nature of their own minds.
mhm,
Clear that mindfulness isn't a magic pill. Used carelessly, it can even become a way to bypass pain rather than work through it. And that's why clinical ethics, supervision, and humility are central to everything that we do. It's not about turning mindfulness into a treatment per se. It's about
mhm,
that being present is the condition in which all healing begins. But in terms of insurance companies, they still have some way to go in terms of understanding the role of, say, yoga in the treatment of PTSD. Even as evidence-based approach, there have been countless randomized controlled trial studies done evidencing its efficacy. But we'll hopefully get there in the future, right?
mhm, mm. Ah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And Robert, let's talk about your journey as well before we further dive deep into the topic. You have spoken openly about your own mental health journey, which is encouraging, empowering as well. Um, and uh, I'm so interested to know. I mean, the role of mindfulness in shaping you as a leader, not just professionally but emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah, so my journey with mindfulness didn't begin in a clinical training or a psychology textbook. It began in the quiet space of exhaustion. Um, I was leading a major humanitarian child protection initiative in post-conflict zones, working 16-hour days. I was emotionally overloaded, often surrounded by trauma. I would solve everyone else's crisis, but I wasn't tending to my own. I ended up through a series of bizarre events on a silent meditation retreat in northern Thailand, almost by accident. And then something you could say cracked open. It wasn't immediate peace, but an invitation to meet myself with honesty. That was the first time I realized I didn't actually have to believe every thought I had. I didn't have to chase every emotion. The ability to pause, to notice, to respond rather than react was quite life changing. And then what started as a personal coping tool became a deeper practice that now informs not just my life, but everything I've built clinically and professionally. Mindfulness gave me back my breath, and with it, a sense of clarity that continues to guide me, especially in the messiest and most human moments of life and leadership that we all know and understand. But in terms of leadership and kind of high stake roles, as I said, I spent much of my career leading large scale programs in social work and mental health across Southeast Asia and East Africa. I can say this with great certainty that when you're in positions of leadership, particularly in trauma heavy environments, the biggest threat to your effectiveness isn't external, it's reactivity. Mindfulness has been an anchor that helps me lead with steadiness, especially in moments of chaos. It gives me the capacity to hold uncertainty without needing to rush to fix it. It allows me to be fully present in tough conversations and to regulate my own nervous system when the stakes are high, and to lead from a place of, I suppose, what I'd like to think is grounded clarity rather than less or ego. And at the Beekeeper, we try and teach our entire team, from clinicians to operations staff, to lead mindfully, because
Mm.
informed systems require trauma-informed leadership. And that means cultivating presence, not just policy. You can write all the policies you want, but if people aren't present and grounded, then they're not going to be implemented. So being able to stay connected to your values, even when you're under pressure, I think that's what real leadership looks like in this field of mental health.
Yeah, true. That's true. I really love the fact that you mentioned that mindfulness helped you remember how to breathe. I mean, that's such a beautiful way to kind of I mean, condense the entire beauty of mindfulness. Uh, and because breath work is one of the most popular and very effective channel or tool when we talk about mindfulness. Um, but I absolutely connected with that, especially with this one particular sentence that you mentioned.
Yeah, when I was learning to play the Tibetan bowls, my wonderful instructor used to constantly say to me, "Breathe, Robert, breathe." So it's all in the breath. We start with the breath, and it's a really important part of all mindfulness practices. Is our breath, not necessarily breath work. Breath work is fantastic. Starts with breath, whether it's in meditation, whether it's just being present in the moment.
Yeah, true. Um, and when we talk in the commercial sense, I mean, mindfulness, it's often marketed as cure all. Um, in your experience, Robert, when does it not work, or let's also include maybe a worse case scenario. I mean, it become a distraction from deeper therapeutic work.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, if I think about what our clients are facing and how mindfulness can help, and maybe also the counter to that, how it can also be a distraction. We're living in a time where people are more connected than ever, but also more dissociated. We see it daily in our work. Clients who are highly functional on the outside, but completely untethered on the inside. Many are living in a near constant state of sympathetic activation, fight, flight, or freeze, and
Mhm.
they've learned to adapt by disconnecting. Mindfulness helps interrupt that pattern that people have developed, and not by offering escape necessarily, but by helping them safely return to their bodies. It teaches people to notice what's happening inside them without judgment, to identify sensations, emotions, and triggers in real time. And for those recovering from addiction or trauma, this is really essential work. We've seen clients who couldn't sit still for 30 seconds slowly begin to tolerate and eventually embrace moments of stillness. And from there, something shifts and they begin to feel again. They begin to trust themselves. And that's when the real healing can begin. Not when everything is fixed, but when people remember that they're allowed to be fully human in their own lives. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't come across some patients who are very resistant to this. And when you try and push an envelope that isn't willing to be opened with the patient, with respect to mindfulness based practices, because some people are traditionally opposed to them, then that can be a real, a real issue. Um, and it is something that we do see with more treatment resistant clients. It doesn't
Mhm.
often. It can happen with those who have experienced what I call ecclesiastical trauma. So many people. we work with have had their spirituality weaponized against them, often through rigid religion, authoritarian belief systems, or early trauma that left them confused about where they belong in the world. That's one of the core principles of what we do in this. Spiritual growth must never be imposed. We don't preach, we don't prescribe beliefs. What we offer is space to question, to unlearn, to gently explore. Some of our clients rediscover their sense of sacred, others reclaim their right to simply not know, and either path is welcome. What's powerful is that in Buddhist psychology, for instance, when taught ethically, gives language to the inner world in a way that's curious, kind, and most importantly, non dogmatic.
Mhm.
People rebuild an inner sanctuary not from external doctrine that they've been traumatized by previously, but from grounded presence and self compassion. And that to me is a deeply respectful way and profoundly therapeutic approach to integrating spirituality and care.
Mm.
To overcome that spiritual dogma that someone might have faced before in the past and might make them resistant to mindfulness based practices.
Mm. Yeah, that's definitely a brave lens. Definitely a brave lens. Um, and as you mentioned about the core, this brings us to explore more about the beekeeper. It operates internationally. Um, so uh, you know. Uh, Again, there can be so many cultural interpretations and differences as well. So how do you ensure um, the cultural relevance of mindfulness? I mean, where care, of course, it isn't one size fits all, but it definitely respects the emotional and spiritual identities of people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And cultural competence and cultural attenuation are really fundamental to the work that we do. So it might be that someone is, for religious reasons, opposed to a certain practice. Uh, and that is the onus is on us to then find an approach with our instructors, our mindfulness instructors, our somatic team that fits that individual. And we have 4 people on our team. So, it can range from if someone is opposed to meditation because they don't want to do it, or they find it for them counter to their personally held beliefs, then we can teach something like mindful eating, something really simple, breath work. Again, we can go back to the basics. So you
Yeah.
can be very sensitive to people's personal beliefs, but you can also speak to them as well. And finding that middle ground, meeting someone where they're at is really important, and taking them on a journey where they begin to understand and begin to open up. And perhaps at times become more open to some practices that they were previously opposed to engaging with. But again, it's not about pushing people into a space of discomfort where they don't want to do something. It's about finding something that they're comfortable with. It's not to say discomfort isn't an important part of mindfulness as well. It is an important part of mindfulness.
Hmm. Hmm. And has there been any moment, Robert, where a practice that worked beautifully in one country, it needed to be entirely rethought or maybe improvised or something like that elsewhere?
I would probably say guided meditation. I mean, our clientele are broadly international, so we generally find that we're working with multiple cultures across all of our sites.
Okay.
So we generally have to adapt things like guided meditations to ensure that the patients are able to understand them.
Mm-hmm.
But we've not found the other practices haven't transcended those kind of cultural boundaries, generally speaking. It's
Mm.
been quite successful.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And yeah, I had to ask. I mean, um, you. I mean, Beekeeper is integrating AI into deeply human processes like trauma recovery and mental wellness. Of course, you know, it's quite a nuanced discussion when it comes to AI. So, how do you ensure that AI enhances, not replaces, the mindful human connection at the heart of healing?
A great question. I mean, we're piloting AI in an app that we use for aftercare for our clients. So they're able to access a whole range of different resources, whether it's mindfulness based ones, clinical ones, it really ranges. And that app is being piloted at the moment, and that's one that we won an award for. And it's a very powerful app, and it uses, for instance, AI to assess what's going on with the way people are writing in their feedback in the forums. So, and it not only monitors that, but it assesses what's going on in someone's narrative, and then we get direct feedback whether that is an alert or not, and whether we should be concerned about what they're writing in the forums for our alumni.
Hmm.
It's interesting. It's an interesting approach. The app also uses technology in the phone. So, for instance, if we have a client, and obviously this is with their consent, if we have a client who has been with us for, say, depression or anxiety, and they average 20,000 steps a day, and suddenly it drops to 500 steps a day, we
Hmm.
automatically get an alert that their average number of steps has dropped. So we can push out a notification to them to do a check in with them to see if they're all right. And that's all done by AI, which is pretty powerful stuff. Because if someone's dropped from an average of 20,000 steps a day to 500 steps a day, it clearly means they're isolating. It clearly means something is up. So we need to do a welfare check on them. It's quite scary. The pack.
Huh. Um, uh, uh, and then before we wrap up, I'll just wanted to bring this part of the conversation. Um, I mean, you have created a healing model, Robert, that's deeply ethical and personal. What I can see here, but is it possible that any organization can scale and still remain mindful, or does growth, scaling, if we talk about the business aspects, can they inevitably dilute intention?
That's something I don't honestly know the answer to the question to. Um, I would say that all the evidence I've seen so far would indicate the answer is no,
Mm-hmm.
because when you have growth, you inevitably have individuals involved in the organization that will put profit ahead of outcomes necessarily for clients.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen an organization yet grow to the scale that you're referencing and
Mhm.
truly embed mindfulness into what they're doing. I think it's doable. I think it's achievable. I just think the person leading the organization needs to be very mindful of it
Mm.
in order to achieve it, because it really does take intent. We have an entire separate mindfulness team in our organization, which is which is a big cost center for us. But we choose to do it because it's really important and fundamental to who we are. And, we're not willing to cut corners. So we would rather eat into our margins as an organization and deliver what we say we're going to do for patients rather than cut back on that. and
Mhm.
increase profitability, if that makes sense.
That's more than that. More than that. And oh, yeah, I uh, absolutely admire that. So if our listeners they would like to connect with you, Robert, and also explore more about what Beekeeper is doing, the Beekeeper. So what would be the best way?
Sure, the best way is our website. That's our richest resource, is where we do all our writing. That's beekeeperhouse.com. So that's beekeeperhouse.com. We write regular articles, journal articles, updates on what we do, and also our Instagram as well, which is at Beekeeper House, and my own personal Instagram, which is at Rob Common.
Great. I'll make sure to add mention all the links in the show notes for our listeners. And Robert, thank you so much. Because not only you are reminding us that showing up in leadership, but in care, in recovery, it means being radically human. So it's about listening to pain, um, heart at the center of innovation, and also a holding space even when systems they want speed and results. So thank you so much for I should say defining mindfulness for all of us.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And to all the listeners out there, if today's episode resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. How can you lead more mindfully in your own world? Whether you are holding space for others or you're simply holding yourself together. Until then, this is your host Sana, and you have been listening to the Mindful Living. And thank you to all of you for the courage that it takes to live and lead awake. Until next time, breathe gently, love deeply, and live mindfully. Thank you.